My name is Isabel Montero. I am 36 years old. I am a lawyer, and until a few months ago, I thought that my father had died peacefully, surrounded by love and comfort in the last days of his life. I couldn't have been more wrong. The last time I saw my father alive was during a quick video call, 2 days before he passed away. He seemed weak, tired, but calm. He told me he loved me, that he was very proud of me, and that everything was being taken care of. At the time, I thought he was talking about his will, about the legal issues he had always been obsessed with getting in order. He was that kind of man, methodical, honorable, predictable. But I should have noticed the eyes. There was something in his eyes, a cry for help that I didn't see. After the funeral, my stepmother, Teresa, a woman 17 years younger than my father, always too cold and elegant to be honest, organized a lunch with only those closest to me. My half-brother, Eduardo, was there too, feigning mourning between sips of expensive wine and comments about investments. No one expected what would come days later. I received a sealed envelope with the seal of the law firm my father had trusted for over 30 years. Inside it was a will that would change everything. I had inherited everything. Absolutely everything. The house, the investments, the company, the apartment in Lisbon, and even my grandfather's old collection of Swiss watches. The document was legitimate, validated, authenticated, dated 6 months before his death. The signature was there, firm, as my father's handwriting had always been. But what intrigued me most was the handwritten note that came with it. A short sentence, written in one's own hand, on a folded piece of paper. If something happens to me, don't trust her. And don't just look at what I left. Look at what they tried to hide. That sentence was the beginning of my downfall. And hers too. That night, while everyone thought I was ecstatic about becoming heir to an empire, I was sitting alone in my father's room, smelling the faint scent of the perfume he wore, trying to understand what he wanted to tell me. That's when I realized that things were missing. Small but important pieces. Where was his video camera, which he used every day to record his thoughts? Where were his notebooks? Why had Teresa been so quick to donate clothes and erase traces of his presence in that house? And more importantly, why would my father have left a warning about her? Just for me. What seemed to be a story of mourning and legacy would turn, in the following days, into a hunt. A descent into hell disguised as research. And each step I took brought me closer to a truth that no one wanted me to know. But I couldn't stop anymore. My father was always a man of conviction. He used to say that trust was like a crystal. Once broken, you can try to glue it back together, but it will never be the same. And yet, he trusted her blindly. Teresa entered our lives in an almost theatrical way. He met her at a charity event. She was a press officer for a fancy NGO, and he was the guest speaker. Wearing a tight dress and a practiced smile, she approached him as if she were handing him a tray of good intentions. In less than a year, they were married, and 2 years later, she was already living in the family mansion, with a routine surrounded by privileges and sweet words too sweet not to be rehearsed. I was never close to her. There was a coldness in her gestures, a look that passed through me without seeing me. But my father, he transformed around her. He tried to seem younger, lighter, more flexible, almost like another man. But it wasn't happiness, it was anesthesia. The first time I noticed something strange was at a Sunday lunch, a few months before his death. He was thinner, his eyes were sunken, his voice was less firm, but the strangest thing was how Teresa spoke for him. The doctor said he needs more rest, she announced when he tried to talk about the company. No stress, remember? My father just looked down and nodded, like a scolded child. That bothered me. But the worst was yet to come. That same afternoon, when I went to say goodbye, he hugged me for a long time, something he never did. And as he walked away, he said to me quietly, without looking me in the eyes, "Don't believe everything she says, please." At the time, I thought it was just a bitter observation, a kind of marital resentment, typical of couples in crisis. But today, I hate myself for not having taken it as a warning. After his death, signs of manipulation began to appear. Teresa organized the wake as if it were a gala event. Expensive flowers, discreet photographers, guests who didn't even know my father's middle name. And when he went up to the pulpit to speak, he began with a sentence that made me shudder. Carlos was a stubborn man, but sometimes he needed to be restrained for his own good. What do you mean by restrained? What kind of wife says that at her husband's funeral? It didn't take long for humiliation to knock on my door. When the will was read and it was revealed that I had inherited everything, Teresa lost her composure. In front of the lawyer and the rest of the family, she stood up like an offended actress, shouting, "This is a scam! He promised me half of the company. He would never do that to me." Eduardo, his son, was speechless, but I saw in his eyes something deeper than surprise. Fear. Teresa attacked me with venomous words. She said that I had bewitched my father, that I was ungrateful, that he had only done this out of guilt, for never having been present as a father. I listened to everything in silence, but one thing hurt me more than any accusation. She spat. You don't know the truth about what happened to your father, and I doubt you have the courage to find out. It was in that sentence that everything changed. At that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a dispute over property. It was something dirtier, more serious, something that involved my father's last days, and maybe the way he died. The woman who had shared his bed for nearly a decade wasn't grieving. She was furious that she had lost control, and now she was afraid of what I might find out. What did Teresa do behind the scenes? How did my father go from being a vigorous businessman to a fragile, silenced, and seemingly submissive man? I was about to find out. And it wasn't going to be pretty. Grief is a minefield. And when death is surrounded by suspicion, grief turns into war. After Teresa's breakdown at the reading of the will, the house where my father lived, the same one where I spent part of my childhood, became a toxic, silently hostile place. I needed to go back there, review documents, gather belongings, settle bank debts. But she was there, sitting like a poisonous statue in the main armchair in the living room, looking at me with the contempt of someone who has been unmasked and still refuses to accept it. Eduardo, his son, didn't show up, and he didn't even answer me. Absolute silence, as if he knew that if he said any false word, everything would fall apart. Alone in the shadows of that mansion, I began to notice the trail of destruction my stepmother had left. Torn papers in the trash, old notebooks gone, a safe with a changed password, and at the bottom of a locked cabinet, which I had to break into, I found a box of old tapes. Yes, tapes. My father had a long-standing habit of recording his thoughts on cassette tape, a habit he inherited from my grandfather. Thoughts need to be heard before they are buried, he would say. I found a small tape recorder, already dusty in the corners, and took it with me. That night, lying on the floor of my old bedroom, I listened to hours of recordings of his voice. The sound was muffled, but it was unmistakable. My father, talking to himself, letting out what he would never have the courage to say in public. And one of the last tapes destroyed me. She gave me the pills again today, but I hid 2 of them in my pajama sleeve. They're making me slow and confused. Sometimes I wake up on the couch and can't remember how I got there. Isabel needs to know. If something happens to me, I want them to investigate. Teresa isn't who she pretends to be. And Eduardo, he knows. My heart raced. I pressed play over and over. That was his voice. The clarity, the pain, the exhaustion. It wasn't delirium. He was being medicated without consent, slowly poisoned, controlled. She was killing my father slowly, and no one saw it. Or worse, someone saw. It was at that moment that the pain turned to fury. But my fall wasn't over yet, because when I decided to confront Teresa and show her that I knew, she acted first. The following week, a story planted on a local website said that I was trying to reopen family wounds and questioning the integrity of the grieving widow. The story was signed by a well-known local journalist, a personal friend of hers. People started whispering. Lawyers for partners in my father's company started avoiding me. A proposed merger was put on hold. Investors called me asking for discretion. Teresa wasn't just angry. She was retaliating. And the worst part, I started being called crazy, paranoid, too ambitious. I was being discredited, just as she wanted. On the outside, I was the resentful daughter who inherited everything and wanted more. On the inside, I was a daughter who heard her father's last cry for help and was being crushed for trying to answer it. For the first time in my life, I felt vulnerable, useless, lost in a power game in which she always had the upper hand. But deep down, something inside me was awakening, a strength that I had never known existed before. Because if she thought I would bow down, she didn't know me yet. Do you know what happens when someone has already lost everything? She stops being afraid. That was where I had reached. Publicly discredited, harassed within my father's company, abandoned even by some friends who preferred not to get involved, I only had one certainty. The truth was on my side, and it was time to make it scream. But being right wasn't enough. I needed proof, a method, a plan. I started where Teresa would never have expected: silence. For 2 weeks, I disappeared from all social media, avoided any public appearances, and let her think she had won. In the meantime, I dove into the company's files, which were now under my direction. I demanded reports, reviewed contracts, analyzed every penny moved over the last 3 years. What I found was a web of discrete transactions, payments to shell companies, cash withdrawals made by Eduardo, and absurd purchases registered in the name of the family holding company. The cherry on the cake? An apartment in the name of one of the shell companies, the same one where Teresa went for her meditation sessions in the afternoons. I hired a private detective and confirmed what I already suspected. She was having an affair with the company's accountant, a married man, and coincidentally, the same one responsible for validating the internal balance sheets that hid the embezzlement. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was business-related. It was a scam. And little by little, my father was reduced to a disposable piece in that power game. Teresa needed him to be alive just long enough to sign documents. After that, he was just a hindrance. But the strongest evidence was still missing, something that would directly connect the suspicious medication with my father's behavioral changes. It was then that I remembered an old conversation with the nurse who accompanied him in the last months of his life, Marina. She had left the country shortly after his death, according to Teresa, for personal reasons, but I managed to locate her in Lisbon, and when I scheduled a video call, she took a while to accept. She was visibly nervous, hesitant, until she finally said, "I knew that someone would come looking for me at some point. I just didn't want to be dragged into it." "Marina," I interrupted with a trembling voice. "My father was murdered?" Silence. Long, painful. He started getting worse after they stopped letting me give him his medication. Teresa brought in a private doctor, a friend of hers, and started administering everything herself. I questioned it. The next day, I was fired. They said I was aggressive with the patient. Her eyes filled with tears. But he never complained about me. He called me his blue angel. I felt my stomach turn. "Would you testify to that?" She hesitated. I'm scared. They have money, they have connections, and I have the truth. And now I have you. And I won't let anyone else be silenced. Marina agreed. As long as I guaranteed legal protection and privacy. I promised. And with that, my most important piece on the board finally took position. Now I had recordings of my father, bank statements, evidence of embezzlement, and the witness who had seen him start to waste away. The only thing I was missing was the right moment. So I started sewing. I put together a physical folder with all the documents and gave digital copies to a trusted lawyer. I registered them at the notary's office. I opened a confidential process. And at the same time, I scheduled a reconciliation dinner with Teresa. She accepted it with that cold little smile she wore when she thought she was in control. I let her believe that. For the last time. Have you ever been so close to someone you swore you knew, and at the same time you knew that right there in front of you, there was a monster smiling? That's how I felt at that dinner. I chose an elegant, discreet restaurant where my father used to celebrate his birthdays. I thought it was symbolic. It was as if I was bringing him back to watch the beginning of what she deserved. I reserved a table for two and ordered a red wine that he loved, the same one that Teresa pretended to like but always left in the glass. She arrived on time, wearing a black dress that was too tight for the occasion, impeccable makeup, and a practiced smile. "Isabel," she said with a tone of false tenderness, "I'm glad you called. I thought we were going to resolve this in court." I looked at her calmly. I had rehearsed everything, every gesture, every word, every silence. "I don't want courts, Teresa. I want peace." She smiled, confused. "Peace? After taking everything from me? After leaving me exposed in front of the entire city? You know as well as I do that I didn't take anything. I just received what my father decided to leave me." She rolled her eyes. But the wine was already being poured, and it was time for the first bait. "But I'm not here to discuss the will," I continued, feigning vulnerability. "I'm tired, you know? I don't think this war is getting us anywhere. I want to propose a deal." Now she was interested. She leaned forward, eyes shining with anticipation of manipulation. "What kind of deal?" Smile. "I leave the company in the care of a board of directors. I give you a symbolic amount to move on with your life with Eduardo in peace, and in exchange, you disappear from my life, forever." She bit her lips, suspicious. "And why would I accept so little?" "Because if you don't accept, I'll make everything I have public." She laughed mockingly. "You have nothing, Isabel. Just theories from a hysterical orphan." Then I took a flash drive out of my bag. I placed it on the table without saying anything. She looked at it as if it were a weapon. "This recording is from my father, made 2 days before he died. He says in no uncertain terms that he was medicated without consent, that he is afraid of you, and that if anything happens to him, I should investigate." Her smile disappeared. "He's bluffing." "I am?" I leaned my body over the table. "Have you heard about Nurse Marina?" "Lisboa." She's alive, she's protected, and she's already recorded her statement. Oh, and we have access to the records of the medication purchases made using the CPF number of the doctor you hired, the private one, the one who, coincidentally, prescribed tranquilizers in higher doses than those recommended for someone my father's age. Teresa turned pale. For the first time, her face showed cracks. That is not admissible in court. Maybe, but it is devastating in the media. And I have already registered everything with date, time, and certified copy. If I disappear or suffer any accident, the files will go straight to the press and the public prosecutor's office. She took the cup with trembling hands. She drank. She swallowed hard. What do you really want? The truth was, I wanted to watch her slowly fall apart. I wanted her to feel the weight of every dirty choice she made. But I just replied, justice, and a little peace. In the following days, movements began that she didn't see. I discreetly contacted the company's board of directors to begin internal audits. I asked the IRS to review the suspicious contracts. I hired a second detective to follow Eduardo. At the same time, my lawyer began preparing a formal complaint based on the documents, tapes, and statements. Everything was still quiet, but Teresa was already starting to crumble. A mutual friend told me that she was nervous, sleeping badly, canceling social engagements. And Eduardo? He was trying to sell a luxury car in a hurry. Fear had finally knocked on the door. But I wasn't done yet. There is no sound more satisfying than the uneasy silence of someone beginning to realize they have lost control. In the weeks following our reconciliation dinner, Teresa tried to keep up the act. She posted old photos of herself with my father with sentimental captions, forced smiles at charity events, and walked around town as if she still carried the Montero surname with pride. But she was no longer feared. She was watched. The proceedings were underway. The IRS opened a preliminary investigation. The board of directors gave me the green light to suspend contracts with the shell companies. The press, curious about the sudden disappearance of the widowed heiress, began to ask questions. And then, the first explosion. The accountant, Teresa's lover, was fired from the company. An external auditor found serious inconsistencies in the balance sheets. When confronted, he did not hesitate. He turned Teresa over in exchange for a plea bargain. He confirmed the misappropriation of resources, the manipulation of numbers, and, most importantly, her direct involvement in all decisions. But it didn't stop there. Nurse Marina, upon learning of the progress of the case, plucked up the courage and agreed to give a formal video statement in the presence of a prosecutor. She gave a detailed account of the medication changes, the orders to keep her away from the room, and the moments when she saw my father unconscious, sedated, with no reasonable medical explanation. The prosecution began to move. And, like a domino effect, more people started talking. A former driver confided that, in her final months, he would see Teresa receiving visits from friends at odd hours. My father's secretary revealed that he had tried to change his will weeks before he died, but the paperwork mysteriously disappeared. The facade began to crumble. Teresa contacted me again. Not in person, of course. She never faced problems head-on. She sent a lawyer. My client wants to resolve everything amicably without scandals. She is willing to give up her assets in exchange for a silence agreement. My lawyer just laughed. Do you still think you're in a bargaining position? The truth is that Teresa didn't know what was coming. I didn't just want to take away her possessions, her status, her mask. I wanted the world to know what she did to the man who loved her until his last breath. And then I made the final move. I prepared a discreet press conference. I invited serious journalists, the same ones my father respected. I presented the recordings, the documents, the reports. I didn't put on a show. I did justice. On the same day, the public prosecutor's office requested the opening of an investigation. Teresa was summoned. Eduardo was also summoned. She tried to flee the city. She was stopped at Lisbon airport trying to board a plane with tickets purchased in her maiden name. She was unrecognizable. Her hair tied up, sunglasses on, and a look of desperation. She was detained to give a statement. And even though she was released under precautionary measures, she was already scheduled. The headline said it all. Businessman's widow suspected of poisoning and misappropriation of family fortune. The society that had once applauded her now shunned her. Invitations were withdrawn. Partnerships dissolved. Her circle turned to dust. And for the first time, she had to live with what she had always run away from. The truth. But I wasn't looking for simple revenge. I wanted justice. And I wanted her to feel every second of the panic, the shame, the helplessness that my father silently felt. Have you ever watched a collapse happen in slow motion? It's like watching an empire crack at the edges until everything implodes with a roar that no one can ignore. That's exactly what happened to Teresa. The preliminary hearing in the case, which investigated progressive poisoning, embezzlement of funds, obstruction of a will, and manipulation of assets, attracted national attention, not only because of the seriousness of the case, but because of who she was, the woman everyone considered a lady, refined, untouchable, the elegant widow of one of the most respected businessmen in the country. But it only took the first video being shown in court for the illusion to be shattered. If something happens to me, please, check in with Teresa. She's giving me something. I don't know what, but I'm getting slow. I forget things. This isn't me. This isn't me. The recording of my father's voice silenced the room. It was as if he were there, as if he had returned to make his own judgment. Teresa tried to keep her composure. She wore a beige suit and a stiff bun that seemed glued to the back of her head, but her eyes gave everything away. When the prosecutor presented the statements from the shell companies, the photos of the meetings with the accountant, the messages exchanged between her and Eduardo about solving the old man before he solves the company, the floor beneath her feet disappeared. And then Marina came, dressed simply, voice firm, eyes teary. I saw him cry. I saw him begging not to be medicated. And then they took me out of the room. They took me out of the house. I could never see him again. He knew. He just didn't have the strength. The judge sighed deeply. And then she looked at Teresa. Do you wish to speak? She fell silent. For the first time, Teresa had no narrative, no charm, no way out. Across the room, Eduardo was shaking. His lawyer had already suggested a plea bargain. He knew that if he tried to protect his mother, he would go down with her. And that's exactly what happened. He gave everything away. He admitted that he knew about the drugs, that he helped manipulate the records, that he embezzled money from the company along with the accountant, that Teresa promised part of the inheritance, and that they both knew that, for that, my father had to disappear. The masks fell one by one. The videos were shown on national television. The recordings went viral on social media with captions such as, "The cry of a betrayed father," and "The daughter who listened when no one else would." Public opinion didn't just turn against Teresa. It devoured her. She lost sponsorships, friends, and consulting jobs. Famous brands deleted photos with her. Events she used to attend closed their doors, and her personal fortune was frozen by court order. But the most memorable moment was yet to come. On the day the partial sentence was handed down, a journalist approached me as I was leaving the court. "Isabel, you won. How do you feel?" I smiled, but with an emptiness in my chest. I didn't win. I just put the truth back where it belonged. And I gave my father the dignity they tried to steal until the end of his life. At that moment, I felt tears in my eyes, but it wasn't pain. It was relief. Revenge wasn't about seeing her broken. It was about freeing my father from his silence, about honoring who he really was, and the love he had for me. Teresa left through the back door, surrounded by security guards and booed by the crowd. The same woman who paraded around with glasses of champagne and speeches about morality was now just a defendant. What happens to someone who has built an entire life on lies when the truth finally explodes? It rots. Teresa was officially indicted for criminal association, ideological falsehood, intentional poisoning with aggravating circumstances, and embezzlement of assets. The prosecution chose not to charge her directly with homicide, since the post-mortem toxicology examination, late and inconclusive, did not provide a solid legal basis. But what she did was a moral execution, a cruel erasure. And for justice, this was also a crime. Sentenced to 18 years in prison, Teresa lost everything. The apartment where she lived was auctioned off to pay the fines. Her jewelry was confiscated, her offshore accounts were frozen, and most symbolic of all, the school where she gave lectures on ethics and the image of the modern woman removed her image from all public archives. A true rewriting of her presence in the world. Eduardo, his son, received a reduced sentence for collaborating. He had to return the embezzled funds, sell his luxury goods, and perform community service for 5 years. Today, he lives far from the city. Some say he works as a delivery driver for an app. Others say he disappeared into the countryside, trying to forget who he was. Me? I followed. But not as an heir, as the keeper of a story that no one wanted to hear until it was too late. After the sentencing, the family mansion was returned to me. I entered it alone, on a cloudy afternoon, and walked to my father's office. The room still had the faint smell of leather and wood. I found an old photograph on the table, the two of us, when I was about 8 years old, him helping me ride my bike. I sat in his chair, took a deep breath, and cried. Not of pain, of restored dignity. Months later, I published a book, Not with the sensationalist details of the case, but with the letters my father left me, with excerpts from the tapes I recorded, and with reflections on emotional abuse, manipulation, and how charismatic people can hide monsters. The title was simple: The Silence He Asked Me to Break. It became a bestseller. I was invited to speak at events, universities, and restorative justice forums, and for the first time, I heard women and men tell me how they identified with them, how they lived with people like Teresa, how they felt the same poison, invisible and constant. But not everything was strength. Inside, I remained broken for a long time. There is no clean victory when you face your own blood. There were days when I missed my father so badly that I could barely get out of bed. In others, I found myself smiling as I remembered how he would ruffle my hair and call me my girl with the fiery eyes. The pain never goes away, but the guilt does, because today, I know I did what needed to be done. And Teresa, she's still in prison. I tried not to follow her, but sometimes curiosity wins. I saw a photo of her months later, without makeup, dejected, sitting in a collective cell. That powerful woman who used to get into luxury cars now shared space with someone she always pretended not to see. Her fall was not just physical, it was symbolic, social, moral. She fell from where it hurt the most, from the pedestal she built with the suffering of others. Time does not erase the deepest pain, but it teaches us to breathe between the scars. It's been a year since Teresa was sentenced. A year since I closed the door of the mansion for the last time and decided to start my life over, not as an heiress to a fortune, but as a woman who faced the darkness with open eyes. Today, I live in a simple house near the sea. I left the big city, the pressure of the spotlight, the phone calls from curious people wanting more details about the scandal. I exchanged all that for a small, quiet space full of real life. Here, the mornings smell of fresh coffee and sea salt. The nights are peaceful, without whispers of fear or ghosts in the walls. I still hear my father's voice sometimes, not on the recordings, but in my memory. When I see an injustice, he whispers, "You know what to do." When I doubt myself, I remember his eyes, steady, saying, "You are stronger than you think." People ask if I regret it, if I would have done anything differently. The answer is simple: no. I was raised by a man who believed that the truth is the most precious thing anyone can leave behind, and that is what I inherited. Not the real estate or the stocks. The real legacy was the courage to not bow my head when everyone said it was easier to forget. My life took a new direction. I opened a small legal consultancy focused on victims of financial and emotional manipulation. I receive cases of women who have been silenced by their partners, daughters who suspect fraud in their parents' companies, sons who want to understand why their mothers keep erasing the past. The truth doesn't heal everything, but it gives names to wounds, and names are powerful. In the end, I wasn't the daughter who inherited an empire. I was the daughter who inherited a mission. One day, I organized all the papers from the case, the evidence, the tapes, and put them in a box with my father's name handwritten on it. I put them in the back of a closet, because now it's part of my story, but it no longer defines me. My father is gone, but I didn't let him be forgotten. Teresa remains imprisoned, isolated, and perhaps now you understand that the greatest punishment was not prison. It was being remembered as what she always feared being, an empty woman who tried to silence true love and lost. And me? I keep going, one step at a time, with pain, yes, but also with hope, because in the midst of the ruins she tried to leave, I planted something new, and where there was a lie, today truth flourishes, and that, no one will ever take it away from me.